everybody. Welcome to another edition of Founder Wisdom Podcast. Today we have Brian R. Johnson with us. He is the co-founder of Canopy Management, which is an Amazon PPC firm. They do very interesting stuff. Brian, I'm just going to let you introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about Canopy.
Absolutely. So I do represent Canopy Management. So my background, well, I guess first of all, Brian Johnson. So I am currently located in Texas in the United States, in South Central Texas, between Austin and San Antonio. Originally, I came out of the Oregon, Washington area, Pacific Northwest of the United States. Came down, lived in Europe for a few months, and then came down back to the States and lived in the southern states ever since, Arizona, and then now in Texas for the last 10 years. So,
how was your European experience?
Oh, it was good. I mean, I think I've traveled more to different European countries in the last 5 or 6 years. So I got a lot more experience as far as other countries, but I lived in Italy for about 3 months, primarily out of, it was a little rural town called Impruneta, outside of Florence, Italy. And then we would just go through and I'd work a little bit during the days, and then I would travel by train to, all the different cities that I could get to in Italy during that 3 months. So,
nice.
Yeah, it was quite interesting, living in a 1,500-year-old house, out in the countryside. So,
culture shock, kind of.
It was a little bit. I spoke a little bit of the language. I learned, and then my girlfriend at the time, she's fluent in Spanish, and so she was able to translate a lot of the other, the rest of it, I guess.
Nice.
But yeah, since then I've been able to go to a lot of other European countries and a lot more trips around the world and stuff. So it's been fun. But as far as like business background goes, I've been in e-commerce for about 14 years, and I've always been, apparently I was always an entrepreneur, because even as a kid, I was always trying to figure out, what kind of a business thing I could do. I was never that stereotypical story of, hey, I was the kid who was selling candy to his classmates at school. I wish I was, but definitely in my teenage years, I was always hustling. I was always trying to do something on the nights and the weekends. And so after fighting that instinct and spending about 20 years in corporate America, I finally got rid of that and shifted over to doing real business, which means actually working for real.
Right.
And but yeah, I've been in e-commerce for about the last 14 years, in the Amazon space for the last 7 years. So the first 7 was primarily on eBay, and I was selling money counting equipment, like banking equipment, like coin sorters and money counters and that kind of stuff. Got some interesting stories with that too, but dealing with movie studios and drug dealers and all kinds of weird
Scarface and all that.
Funny. Exactly. Yeah. I was sold to quite a wide range of people, I guess, jails, all that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, shifted over to Amazon and been in the Amazon space for the last 7 years, and started selling my own products. And then got into, because I learned enough that I knew a little bit more than some other people. Other people started asking me more questions, and I had to go and try to manage it and research it. And I was still very much a novice at the time. But one of the things that kept coming up was just trying to get the advertising to work, the Amazon PPC advertising.
Amazon's kind of the place to be like nowadays. And we'll talk a bit more about that. I just want to go back in time and revisit the point that you mentioned, basically about being an entrepreneur at an earlier age. Like, funny enough, my dad was an entrepreneur, but in my generation, we had the curse of video games. So, like it was kind of, oh, do I stay and play Xbox and become the best at Call of Duty and at World of Warcraft, or do I start the venture? And I think
Right.
that's one bad thing about video games, although they do shaped my brain and gave me unfair advantage later on, from being like so productive and so focused on one thing. And, the gamification of all of it, I think it gave us a massive advantage on my generations, although most of our parents were like, yeah, what are you doing? You're wasting your time. And frankly, I think I'd be like that with my kids, nowadays. But I think that that's an interesting point to note. I would have rather spent that time and energy building stuff. I think my first venture was around 16 or 17, and I wish I knew before, but that's interesting that you picked it up so quick. And then it's the cash counting machine. Not sure how you got into this, but it's like yeah, that's directly like related to abundance and wealth. And then I guess you found yourself at another nice place lately, which is Amazon. I mean, that's pretty much a place to be. The company has grown like almost twofold since like 5 years or so. Has pretty much
Yeah.
exploded during COVID. Have you felt that through the business? Have you felt like a massive influx of clients in the past 2 years?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely see where there's been a lot more increase in overall sales volume on Amazon and in
Mm-hmm.
e-commerce in general during
Mm-hmm.
COVID. But you also have those, for you get some of these great stories where people are just like, oh, I was making $100,000 a day selling face masks. Well, that lasted for 2 weeks, probably, in reality.
Yeah.
And then you
And how
have
much
others
money
that's
do they
like,
cost? Like they always hide these
right.
these types of things.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's definitely is like, were they actually, making a profit off of it? And because of the high prices at the time, they probably were. Um, Certainly there's other stories where you've got where somebody, their whole product line was to serve two markets. For instance, we had a client like this that we tried to salvage, and they ended up pivoting. There's a great story behind that, but they
Mm,
they supplied conference like live exhibits and conference
mm,
shows, and they also supplied school systems.
mm,
And both of those shut down completely when COVID started. And
mm.
so their sales went from, a couple $100,000 a month down to 20,000 a month.
Wow.
And as a business owner, I've certainly been in those cases because we did the same thing, at Canopy, and that is myself and my co-founder. Um, that's one of the first things is like, okay, is this going to hit us? Is this going to be a waterfall
Hmm.
effect? Are we going to lose, a bunch of clients? And one of the
Hmm.
first things we did was, okay, let's first of all focus on our employees, and then second, focus
Okay.
on what can we do for those clients that are struggling. So
Hmm.
in that situation, when COVID first hit, and we had a few clients, probably had several clients actually at the time that were hit hard by COVID because their product lines were for the in-person market.
Hmm.
And so what we did is we said, okay, we're going to continue to manage your ads and your marketing and that kind of stuff on Amazon to try to help you through, but we're not going to charge you for it. In other words,
Okay.
we're going to hold all of our fees for the next, couple of months.
Hmm.
And in all except for one case, every single client was able to recover in part because of what we helped them to recover with, as well as to give them a pass as far as additional fees. In
Hmm.
fact, the one that I was mentioning that they went from, a couple 100,000 down to 20,000 a month. They they of course had to lay off a number of their employees, but they were able to completely pivot and introduce a whole new product line so that within a year they were back up to, being able to rehire, the employees that wanted to come back. They were able to
Hmm.
rehire those employees within a year because they completely
Hmm.
pivoted to a whole new product line that wasn't reliant on in-person activity. And
Hmm.
so, and I think we still work with them today. Yeah, we actually do. We work with them today still. So that actually
Hmm.
created more of a kind of a long-term case. Now, what myself and my co-founder did from an agency standpoint, at the beginning of COVID, we said, okay, we need to store cash real fast to make sure that we can keep everybody employed who works for us.
Yeah, the payrolls.
Because Yeah, so for the payroll, right? We need to basically say, okay, we need to set aside probably 3 months of additional reserve in addition to what we would
Hmm.
normally have, an additional 3 months of payroll reserve. Because one of the things we realize really quick is it's not simply just, oh, we have this one person who's working for us. A
Hmm.
lot of times, we heard this many, many times, is the spouses or family members of our employees, they were
Hmm.
getting laid off from their jobs. So
Yep.
they were already
Mm.
taking an income hit.
Terrible.
And if we had to cut back, if we had to lay somebody off, then the family has no income. And that
Yeah,
wasn't acceptable
zero.
to us. And
Hmm.
so my co-founder and I, my partner and I, we said, okay, we're not taking a dime from the company. We're putting everything into
Okay.
payroll savings. And we did that for 2.5 months. Um,
Wow.
we didn't take anything out of the company.
Until
Just
things
and
got
we didn't
better,
have
right?
to lay off anybody. Yeah, we didn't have to lay off anybody.
That's pretty cool. That's a
So
cool story. I mean, mine was a bit more chaotic. I still remember the time and place because as a digital nomad, I travel a lot, and I would change pretty much country every month. But then, like once this thing hit, I would change cities in Mexico every month. And I still remember where I was, and at the time I was serving realtors, doing Facebook ads for them, and I was worried because these guys, everything was on pause. They couldn't visit house literally and that lasted probably like a couple months. And by then, I knew I needed to pivot. So everything in life, once you look at it, every negative events in life, once you look at it like after, in the future later on, I look at it with like grateful eyes because I pivoted from a business model also that wasn't working with people that weren't willing to pay for my services back in the days, realtors. Um, Certainly it stressed me out, and yeah, I didn't know if I would be able to meet the payrolls, and so forth. But
yeah.
yeah, looking back at it, I'm definitely grateful. I'm curious as how you met Brian, basically, because your co-founder is named Brian. How did you guys meet?
So he'd actually hired me to coach him or to consult for his brand because at the time
Okay.
I had kind of jumping back into to my Amazon story is
Mhm.
after I had started my own product, um, I started actually coaching and consulting for other
Mhm.
brands that were friends of mine, right? So just kind of helping them
Mhm.
do a favor. One of the things I realized was I didn't know how to do the advertising, so I went out seeking, okay, how do I learn how to do the advertising on Amazon?
Mhm.
And there wasn't anything, just
Okay.
crickets. There wasn't training courses, there wasn't community, there wasn't software, there wasn't
Mhm.
coaches or anything like that. Just didn't exist. And so I
Yeah.
started just researching it because I didn't have any other choice. And I started a Facebook group called Amazon
Okay.
PPC Troubleshooting just to talk about
Okay.
troubleshooting advertising for Amazon, right?
Yeah.
Very, very narrow, right? When everybody else was,
Yeah.
they had their groups and their podcasts and they're saying like everything about selling on Amazon. But then they'd pull me on to their podcasts and their groups to talk about advertising because they didn't know the
Mhm.
advertising either.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I had originally started out the group as like a little mastermind, like a little discussion.
Mhm.
Like, hey, I was
Mhm.
expecting like maybe 50, 60 people would get together and say, hey, how do you use this? Or what's working for you?
Yeah.
That group has 22,000 sellers in it today.
Holy shit.
So,
Was it organic or did you
but
like promote it in some way?
all, well, we did have that's actually a good point. So I did go into other groups and I would make comments and I would try to be helpful.
Mhm.
And if I did try to promote my own group,
Okay.
or subsequently I created the first Amazon advertising software, very
Mhm.
rudimentary, very ugly. It's like I've heard a statement it says like, look, if you launch your um if you're not embarrassed by your first launch, then you're too late. You waited too long to come to
Exactly.
market. If you're not embarrassed by the first version, I was embarrassed by the first version, so I actually hit that one
Yeah.
correctly. Um, but I did try to go into other groups, and while I was being helpful on one hand, I was occasionally like, hey, here's my site, or here's my link, whatever. And of course, as should have happened, is the moderator would of course, the group owner would shut me down and say, like, yeah, you can't do that. But they at least recognized that I was providing value to their community. So they simply just slapped my hand. I don't have that kind of tolerance in my own group. If somebody comes in, they post a link and say, hey, you can hire me, you're gone. You're banned from the group. There's no second chance.
Would you
If
also ban
they,
someone posting for a job? Like I post for jobs, like, hey, I'm looking for this person. Would you ban me?
no, not necessarily. It depends on what the intent is behind it. So if
Okay.
somebody's simply just like going, hey, I'm looking to hire somebody, whatever, I'll probably let it go.
Okay.
Also, anybody that I know that has contributed some valuable information, um, then of course I would let them ride. I might mention it to say, hey, easy with the links and that kind of stuff. But if somebody just comes in their first week and they're like going, oh, here's my link to my Fiverr gig and all that kind of stuff, like, yeah, sorry, you're not doing that here. So I tried to
Yeah,
keep the
definitely.
quality up by being the mean ogre, but anyway, so created the community, created the
That
software.
was that was like early days, and that's probably how you met Brian. I
Yeah,
mean,
well, so
let's
Brian
take a
actually,
yeah.
let me bridge that. So Brian was aware, apparently, as Brian tells the story, is when he was looking around for somebody to consult for his own brand, he started going into different groups and saying, hey, who do you listen to? Who do you respect? Really
Okay.
knows their stuff? And people kept on pointing to me. Or they'd point to somebody else, and then he'd ask them and say, okay, who did you learn from? And they'd point back to me. So ultimately, it's because I had laid the groundwork of being out there in service, essentially, to the community and really trying to help people genuinely. First, that does two things. One is it certainly can make a name for yourself, but it also puts you to the fire. In other words, when people start coming to you for the answers, you always end up having to have the answers, which means you got to be ready to go out and research all the answers, even if you don't know it,
Exactly.
which
Yeah,
it
you need
happens
to
a
know
lot.
your shit. Like, generally speaking, I
Exactly.
have a saying. Most people say, like, hey, never be the smartest in the room. I said the other way around, always be the smartest in the room. Obviously, put yourself with smart people, but always be the smartest among smartest. Um,
Yeah.
that's great. And yeah, like, I guess he saw an expert or someone that he could consult with. He hired you. And after that, he saw results, and he was like, "Okay, this stuff is exploding. Let's start something together." Is it
Yeah.
how it went?
That's exactly, yeah. And that carried over to us creating the whole training course, what we call Sponsor Products Academy, which is the first professional, like, 4-week training course that we launched. And that
Interesting.
it was a crazy amount of work creating a course. Oh my gosh. It
Yeah,
is very painful how many hours it takes to create a course that big.
yeah. How big is it? Like, how many hours in total?
Watch time, 16 maybe.
Production,
It doesn't
like
sound like
40
it's
or
that much.
80?
Yeah, it's probably, well, the whole production, recording, just kind of coming up with all the graphics and charts and all that kind of stuff was probably at least another 4 to 6 weeks of production on that. And
Oh,
so, I
and
mean,
yet costs and
there was literally there was a week where I had a cot, a fold up bed, right? A cot in my office because I didn't go home, because I was just like I was so unbelievably over caffeinated and bloodshot eyes for a week straight, just trying to produce all
oh
the
God,
content, just trying to get it all out of my head and into this course, just so that we could meet our launch deadline.
the
It's just,
hustle.
but if you're not, I don't, as I get older, the less likely I'm going to do that.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
any
You want to have the
entrepreneur,
quality
any
of life.
founder, yeah, exactly. Any entrepreneur, any founder has got to be willing to take that on. That's how
Yeah,
you're
and
going
how
to be
how's the
successful,
course
is
doing
the
right
willingness.
now? Like, is it doing well? Like, how many sales are you hitting on a monthly basis?
Well, so we don't continue to sell it now. We only do launch model. So
Okay.
we did 3 different versions across 4 years. We did 3 different versions. We haven't done we haven't done one since COVID started. In fact, we
Okay.
launched the last one right when COVID was just first hitting. We haven't done one since.
Why
But
did
the
you
first
discontinue?
launch, mostly because we got really busy with other things. We didn't necessarily need it. The information was still good, and then time goes by. It's kind of like, okay, do we really want to do this? It's like, no. It's not that there's not a need for the knowledge. I think it's just there's so many people who have come into the community that have enough expertise that they can share their knowledge, and that's enough for most people to get by and to learn and to grow. They don't need a formal expensive course, because we had
Yeah.
it was a $2,000 price point on our course.
Okay. Quite high. And the DFY, how
Yeah.
much is it?
As far as done for you, the agency with Canopy, I know our
Mhm.
videos, it seems like it's cutting out a bit here, but so we typically kind of a rule of thumb is, I think it's probably in the, gosh, I'm trying to think now as far as the general rule of thumb on this. So our minimum starts at about 1,500 per month. And so if
Okay.
a brand is not selling more than about 30,000 per month on Amazon, then it's probably not a good fit for what we do. But for those that do qualify to work with us, we have a phenomenal track record. We average for the average for our clients is we at least double their revenue and nearly double their profitability.
Wow. That's
So
epic.
we've got some great track record, as far as the agency goes, but there's kind of a minimum baseline in order to work with us.
Yeah, for sure. And how many clients do you have?
Gosh, I want to say 170, 180, something like that currently.
Wow. That's a lot of people to serve. And I guess, do you take also like a ROAS share, a ROAS share, like any profits that they make, you take a percentage of that?
So we take a percentage of growth above what they came in with.
Okay.
So it's a pretty small percentage. Certainly, we're giving a lot more value than we're taking. But yeah, it is based off of. It wasn't always that. We've adapted the pricing model over the years. The agency is about 4 years old now, so we've had to adapt the pricing model just to make sure that it was always a good value, so that we didn't have. Because honestly, one of the things that would come back is we'd have each quarter or each year some accountant or tax attorney or controller or something like that would come in and talk to the CEO and say, hey, your biggest expense consistently every month is this agency over here. Like if we got rid of that expense, then we could be this much more profitable. The problem was we didn't do a good enough job early on in educating the leadership, the CEO, of here's the results that we're producing for you, and here's ultimately the final benefit to you, so that they could push back on that person and say, look, the ROI is where we need it to be. We're going to continue to spend that money. Yes, it's the highest expense, but keep spending it. And so they get influenced by their controller or their accountant without having,
Showing
without
your
being able
work
to
is super
defend.
important.
Yeah.
Like reporting, I
So it
always tell
really
my
is.
team,
Yeah, you have to communicate it in a way that you've got to answer the question consistently every single week, every single month is what's in it for me to continue to pay you for what you're doing, if that's a service. Same thing that I teach in the Amazon world for product listing is you've got to answer the question of what's in it for me if I buy your product to the consumer. Otherwise,
always.
You can't just assume that they're going to just magically come up with the answer for themselves. If you should be able to hand it to them on a silver platter and say, here you go. It should be obvious that you know exactly why you're purchasing this product or this service. And that's something
reminding
that
them.
is,
reminding them through
what's the
reports,
benefit?
because humans are imperfect. They often forget, and just putting a report every Friday in their screen, reminding them the results you achieve for them, is always great. Whether you're a startup, whether you're an employee, if you're an employee, like I asked my employees during the daily stand-ups to come up with victories, every meeting, every single day.
Yeah.
Yesterday we agreed that we would do that. Today, did you come with a victory? Did you come with like a bottle of wine to my house, or did you come empty-headed and you expect me to feed you?
Right. That's a good point. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah, we do the daily
Yeah.
stand-ups also. So that's a good part
I
of our
have
culture is.
a parting question for you, because we've got like a minute left or so for the pod.
Okay.
What have you learned in the past few years with Canopy? What are the top 3 lessons, let's say, that you've learned in the past few years?
Definitely demonstrating the value, answering the question of what's in it for me, what we were just talking about.
Yeah.
By far, I'd lead the conversation with that now. Whether
Okay.
somebody is prospecting me on LinkedIn, or
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to sell one of my own products, or trying to help a client sell their product or their service, I invest in Airbnb and crypto now. And so in each of these cases, I carry that over, and that is really focusing. I've got to be able to answer first and foremost, what's in it for me from the consumer standpoint. I'm going to give you money. What's in it for me? What's the benefit to me? That's the first thing. Second thing, from an agency standpoint, from any business standpoint, is not having processes or having broken processes and SOPs is a surefire way to kill your company.
Okay.
Like if you don't have, you're not going to last more than a year just winging it based off of, because you might have subject matter experts in-house. That's who I was. But we had to get it out of my head and onto paper and into a checklist so that other people could replicate the same results with consistency. If you don't have those SOPs, you're going to get inconsistency. You're going to lose clients. You're going to have high turnover, and it's just going to go down from there. So the processes and the SOPs need to be created as early on as possible. The third thing, treat people fairly. That's part of how we adjusted our pricing model. Is we said, look, we want to make this more and more fair to our clients, and then we also make sure that we're constantly working for our own staff, for our own people. We're constantly asking the question of, like, what can we do for you? Where did like you said, with the daily stand-up, we do the same thing company wide on Zoom. We'll literally have 60 to 100 plus, employees that'll jump on every single morning, depending on what time zone and whether or not they're available. But they'll jump on and we'll share, where did we win yesterday? What were the big, and who helped you? Who got caught being awesome? Who helped you to win yesterday? So we're constantly building up the team through that daily interaction and constantly recognizing each other for the teamwork that we provide. So those are the big 3.
Pretty cool. Good lessons. Well, Brian, thank you for that. Thank you for your knowledge. Thank you for your presence today. It was a very cool podcast. Learned a lot through your past and like your journey with Canopy. And those lessons are pretty good, especially the second one with SOP. I'm gonna write it down for sure. So thank you for your gift today. And have yourself a great day, great weekend.
Sounds good. You too. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Bye.